What if I told you that some of the creepiest urban legends you've ever heard are actually real? From a babysitter receiving terrifying phone calls, to a mysterious watcher stalking a family in New Jersey, and even a disfigured man roaming the roads of Pennsylvania, these stories are more than just myths. They're rooted in chilling, real-life events. Stay tuned as we dive into 5 terrifying urban legends that turned out to be horrifyingly true. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend. Sam and Lisa had booked a stay at the Briarwood Hotel, an old but charming place in a quiet corner of town. The hotel boasted vintage decor, luxurious linens, and excellent service. After a long drive, all the couple wanted was to rest and enjoy a quiet night. When they entered room 325, however, something felt wrong. The room was neat, the bed made perfectly, but a faint, strange odor lingered in the air, like wet fabric left to mold. Lisa wrinkled her nose. "Smells weird in here," she said, dropping her overnight bag by the door. Sam shrugged. "It's an old hotel. Probably mildew or something. Let's open a window." They pushed through the slight unease and unpacked. After dinner at a nearby restaurant, they returned, exhausted from the trip. The smell was stronger now, thick and nauseating. Lisa lit a candle she always carried with her, but it did little to help. They lay down, trying to ignore it, but sleep didn't come easily. Lisa kept tossing and turning, the strange odor nagging at her. Around 3 a.m., she sat up, rubbing her eyes. The smell was worse now, an almost putrid stench seeping through the room. "Sam, I can't do this," she whispered, shaking him awake. "Something's wrong. It smells really bad." Sam groaned, frustrated, and flicked on the bedside lamp. They sniffed around the room, checking the trash bin, the closet, and even the bathroom, but nothing seemed out of place. Finally, Lisa crouched beside the bed. She leaned down and peered into the dark space underneath. A horrible, cloying smell hit her like a wall. Gagging, she scrambled back, her heart hammering in her chest. "Something's under there," she gasped. Sam gave her a skeptical look, but knelt down and lifted the mattress off the box spring. The room filled with an overpowering wave of rot. There, wedged tightly between the box spring and bed frame, was a black garbage bag, bulging and bloated. Without thinking, Sam yanked it loose and dropped it on the floor. The plastic split open slightly, and something pale flopped out. A human hand. Lisa screamed. The police arrived within minutes. The officers, trying to keep their expressions neutral, carefully extracted the rest of the decomposing body from the bag. It was the corpse of a man, his skin a sickly gray-green, reeking of death. One officer muttered under his breath, "This isn't the first time this has happened." The couple, still shaken and clinging to each other, overheard him. "What do you mean?" Sam asked. The officer glanced at his partner, as if reluctant to speak. But after a moment, he sighed. "You ever hear that urban legend? The one about people sleeping on a bed with a body hidden underneath? It's real." Sam and Lisa stared in disbelief. "People dump bodies under hotel mattresses more often than you'd think," the officer continued grimly. "Especially in places like this. Hotels on the outskirts, motels nobody pays attention to. We've seen it before. Guests complain about a smell, and we find this." He gestured to the body bag now being zipped up by crime scene technicians. The manager of the Briarwood, pale and sweating, stood nearby, trying to explain how none of the staff noticed. He swore that the room had been cleaned just a day earlier, but the officer shook his head knowingly. "That's the thing," he said. "These places get cleaned quickly. Staff flips the rooms without checking too closely, and if the bed feels heavy, they assume it's just the mattress." Sam and Lisa didn't stay to hear the rest. They packed their bags and left, ignoring the manager's offer for a refund or a free night's stay. As they drove away from the hotel, the horrifying reality began to sink in. They had spent the night unwittingly, on top of a dead body. Months later, Sam stumbled across a news article. Another couple had checked into a motel near Atlantic City and made a gruesome discovery: a body stuffed under the mattress. The article listed several other cases across the country, from Las Vegas to Nashville, each eerily similar. The urban legend was true, and now Sam and Lisa were part of it. They had slept with the dead. When Derek and Maria Broaddus first saw the house at 657 Boulevard, they knew it was the home of their dreams. Nestled in the quiet, upscale town of Westfield, New Jersey, the large colonial-style house seemed perfect for raising their 3 kids. They closed the deal quickly and began planning their move. But the excitement didn't last long. 3 days after closing, Derek went to the house alone one evening to do some painting. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he checked the mailbox before heading out. Among a stack of bills and junk mail, one envelope stood out. It was addressed only to the new owners, in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. No return address. Curious, Derek opened it. Dearest new neighbor, at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within its walls? Why are you here? I will find out. I see you've already started renovating. Did the old owners warn you what's inside the walls? They should have. 6 on 57. Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been waiting for you for years. Will the children play in the basement? It is far enough from the rest of the house. If they scream down there, no one will hear them. Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by. 657 Boulevard every day. Maybe I am in one. Look out the window. You might even see me. Welcome, friends. The Watcher. Derek felt a chill crawl down his spine. At first, he thought it might be a prank. A strange welcome to the neighborhood, maybe. But the more he reread the letter, the more uneasy he felt. The references to the children and the basement made his skin crawl. He locked up the house, got into his car, and sped home. When he showed the letter to Maria, her face went pale. "Who would do this?" she whispered. The next morning, they contacted the police. An officer came to the house, read the letter, and looked just as disturbed as they were. He advised the couple not to tell their new neighbors. Sometimes it was best to keep things quiet and avoid rumors. But then, the second letter arrived. This one was more sinister. Welcome back to 657 Boulevard, Broaddus family. I've been watching your family for a while now. I know you have children. I've counted 3 so far. Are there more on the way? I know their names. I know their ages. Do they enjoy the backyard swing? Or is the house already scaring them? You have changed the house and made it so fancy. It cries for the past and what it used to be. It was better when I was in charge. Who am I? I am the Watcher, and I will be watching. Panic began to set in. Somehow, whoever this Watcher was knew everything about them. Their children's names, what they were doing inside the house, and even small details like the swing in the backyard. Maria refused to let the children go near the property. They stopped visiting the house altogether, but the letters kept coming. Each letter was creepier than the last, filled with personal details only someone observing them could know. The Watcher claimed that his family had watched the house for generations, and that it was now his turn to protect it. "This house is mine," one letter said. "I am the Watcher. You are only the caretakers." The Broadduses began their own investigation. They interviewed neighbors, hired private detectives, and even set up surveillance cameras around the house. But no one ever saw anything unusual. The police couldn't find any fingerprints on the letters, and DNA tests on the envelopes yielded nothing useful. The neighborhood seemed idyllic, but the Watcher was out there somewhere. Was it an eccentric neighbor with too much time on their hands? A former owner who felt attached to the house? Or someone more dangerous? Someone hidden in plain sight waiting to strike? Months went by, and the Broadduses grew more desperate. They decided they could never move in. Who could live peacefully knowing someone was watching their every move? But selling the house proved impossible. Word about the letters had started to spread, and no one wanted to buy a cursed home. The few offers they got were far below what they'd paid. They were trapped, with a house they couldn't live in, and a phantom threat they couldn't find. The letters never stopped. One of the last ones read, 657, Boulevard is mine. It always will be. Your time here will end, but the house will remain, and so will I. To this day, the identity of the Watcher remains unknown. The Broadduses eventually rented out the house to another family, but even they reported receiving strange letters. The mystery continues to hang over 657 Boulevard like a dark cloud, an unsolved urban legend that turned out to be terrifyingly real. The Watcher is still out there, waiting, watching, and perhaps one day the letters will begin again, reminding the world that some nightmares don't end. They just wait patiently for their next victim. Every kid growing up on Staten Island heard the story of Cropsey. He was the boogeyman of the island, a crazed killer said to live in the woods, lurking near abandoned buildings and hunting children. Parents used the story to keep their kids from wandering too far, warning that if they stayed out after dark, Cropsey would snatch them away, never to be seen again. The legend became a part of local culture. Cropsey wasn't just a campfire tale. To the children of Staten Island, he was real. But nobody thought the nightmare would ever leave the realm of folklore until it did. In the early 1970s, children began to disappear from Staten Island. At first, no one made the connection. Police chalked it up to runaways or family troubles. But the community was uneasy. One by one, children vanished into thin air, and rumors began swirling that the stories about Cropsey might be more than just fiction. Then came the name that sent chills through the island: Andre Rand. Andre Rand was no legend. He was a real man with a dark past. Once employed as a custodian at Willowbrook State School, a massive institution for mentally disabled children, Rand had witnessed the horrors that festered within the school's walls. Willowbrook was notorious for neglect, abuse, and inhumane conditions, and after the school closed in the early 1970s, Rand drifted into an even darker life. He was often seen lurking near the ruins of Willowbrook and camping in the surrounding woods. The locals whispered that Rand had gone mad, living off the grid and preying on children who ventured too far into the wilderness. It didn't take long before his presence became synonymous with the Cropsey legend. But what was once an urban myth became chilling reality when children began disappearing, never to return. In 1987, a 12-year-old girl named Jennifer Schweiger went missing. Jennifer had Down syndrome and was last seen walking along a quiet street not far from the abandoned Willowbrook campus. A massive search effort was launched, with volunteers combing through the tangled woods and crumbling buildings. Weeks went by with no sign of Jennifer, until one searcher found a shallow grave behind one of the old Willowbrook buildings. Inside, they uncovered her small, decomposing body. The discovery shocked the community, but it also confirmed the worst fears about Andre Rand. Witnesses had seen him near the area where Jennifer disappeared, and police quickly arrested him. When they questioned Rand, they began to unravel a history far darker than anyone had imagined. During the investigation, police linked Rand to several other missing children from Staten Island, some dating back to the 1970s. Though many of the children's bodies were never found, the circumstantial evidence against Rand was overwhelming. Several witnesses remembered seeing him near the locations where the children were last seen, and his connection to Willowbrook made the story even more sinister. The trial of Andre Rand was explosive, Prosecutors painted him as a man who had embraced the role of the island's urban legend, turning the story of Cropsey into his own twisted reality. Rand denied everything, insisting he was innocent, but the jury didn't believe him. He was convicted of kidnapping, though without the bodies of most of the children, the murder charges couldn't stick. Andre Rand was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, but even with him behind bars, many people on Staten Island never felt truly safe again. The story of Cropsey had become real. Andre Rand may have been locked away, but his crimes haunted the island long after his trial. Parents told their children the legend in hushed tones, not just to scare them, but to protect them, because the monster wasn't just a story anymore. He was real. Rand's conviction wasn't the end of the nightmare either. Some believe he didn't act alone, that there were others, strangers or former Willowbrook employees, still out there, continuing his gruesome work in the shadows. To this day, not all of the missing children have been accounted for, and some claim that the spirit of Cropsey lives on. The woods around Willowbrook remain eerily quiet, as if holding on to the secrets buried within. Now and then, people report seeing strange figures lurking among the ruins, and parents still warn their children not to wander too far from home. Because on Staten Island, everyone knows, Cropsey is watching. And sometimes, legends don't die, they just wait in the dark. The story always sounded like one of those campfire tales, something meant to scare kids into being more careful. It was simple and terrifying. A teenage babysitter receives a phone call late at night. The voice on the other end says, "Have you checked the children?" Thinking it's a prank, she brushes it off. But the calls keep coming, and each time, the voice gets more insistent, more menacing. Eventually, the babysitter contacts the police, who trace the call, only to discover that it's coming from inside the house. It's the stuff of urban legends. But sometimes, the most frightening stories have roots in truth. And in 1950, that truth came to light in a quiet Missouri town, forever embedding this tale into America's collective nightmares. It was a cold, rainy night on March 18, 1950 in Columbia, Missouri, when 13-year-old Jeanette Chrisman agreed to babysit for the Romax, a couple she had sat for many times before. They had a young son, Gregory, who was just 3 years old. Jeanette was known to be responsible and dependable, so the Romax felt comfortable leaving her in charge for the night while they attended a party. Before leaving, Mrs. Romack gave Jeanette the usual instructions: put Gregory to bed, make sure the doors were locked, and don't answer the door for anyone. She also told her to feel free to use the phone if she needed anything, but no one could have known that just hours later, the Romack's cozy suburban home would become the scene of a grisly, unsolved crime, one that would give life to the legend of the babysitter and the man upstairs. Sometime between 10:30 p.m. and midnight, the phone at the Romack house rang. A friend of Jeanette's later told police that she had called her, hoping to chat, but the line had been busy. Perhaps Jeanette had answered another call, or perhaps she hadn't been alone. By the time the Romacks returned home around 1:30 a.m., the nightmare had already unfolded. The front door was slightly ajar, and as they entered, the Romacks noticed that the lights were still on, though the house was eerily quiet. Gregory was fast asleep in his room, untouched by the horror that had taken place just feet away. Then they saw her. Jeanette lay on the living room floor in a pool of blood. She had been brutally attacked, strangled with a cord and struck repeatedly on the head. Her clothes were torn, suggesting a struggle, and one of the phone lines had been ripped from the wall. The sight was devastating, but what haunted the Romacks most was the disturbing silence in the house. There had been no signs of forced entry. Whoever killed Jeanette had already been inside. The police arrived quickly and launched a full investigation, but the evidence only deepened the mystery. Fingerprints were found near the phone, but they didn't match anyone in the Romack's family or their circle of acquaintances. Investigators theorized that Jeanette had answered a phone call shortly before her death, perhaps a call from her killer, someone who was already watching the house. Though several suspects emerged, none could be conclusively tied to the crime. One man in particular, Robert Mueller, a family acquaintance with a troubling history, came under suspicion. Mueller was known to have an unhealthy fixation on young girls and had allegedly been following Jeanette in the weeks leading up to the murder. He was questioned extensively, but the lack of solid evidence meant police could never charge him. The case went cold, leaving the town of Columbia reeling and fueling the legend that would become known as the Babysitter and the Man Upstairs. As the years went by, Jeanette's tragic death was absorbed into American folklore. Details blurred, and soon her story evolved into a terrifying cautionary tale told to babysitters everywhere. The specifics changed with each retelling. Sometimes the babysitter hears strange noises coming from the upstairs bedrooms. Other times, the killer makes repeated phone calls, always asking the same chilling question: "Have you checked the children?" And in the most harrowing version, the babysitter finally calls the police, only to be told the calls are coming from inside the house. Though these variations diverged from the reality of Jeanette Chrisman's murder, the heart of the legend remained the same: an innocent girl, left alone in the dark, hunted by an unseen threat. The real tragedy of Jeanette's story is that her killer was never brought to justice. Despite extensive investigations and public outcry, no arrests were made, and her case remains unsolved to this day. In the quiet suburbs of Missouri, her memory lingers, her name synonymous with an eerie tale of phone calls, locked doors, and dangers lurking just out of sight. And so, whenever babysitters hear a phone ring late at night, they can't help but think of Jeanette Chrisman. They tell themselves that it's just an urban legend, nothing to fear. But in the back of their minds, there's always that nagging thought: what if the story is true? And what if, even now, someone is watching from inside the house? In western Pennsylvania, the story of the Green Man has been whispered for generations. He's said to be a terrifying figure, his skin glowing faintly green, his face horribly disfigured, and his body radiating an eerie light as he wanders the roads at night. Parents warned their children to stay inside after dark, and drivers on lonely highways would keep their eyes peeled, fearing they might catch a glimpse of him in the glow of their headlights. Some versions of the tale describe him as a mutant, caused by exposure to toxic waste. Others say he was the victim of an electrical accident, cursed to wander for eternity. But like many urban legends, the truth behind Charlie No-Face is stranger and sadder than fiction, because Charlie No-Face was real. The man behind the myth was Raymond Robinson, born in 1910 in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. When he was just 8 years old, Raymond's life changed forever. One summer day, he and some friends were playing near a trolley bridge when they noticed a bird's nest sitting atop a metal pole. Being a curious boy, Raymond climbed the pole to reach it, never realizing that the wires above carried 11,000 volts of electricity. The shock nearly killed him. Raymond was thrown to the ground, unconscious, his body severely burned. Miraculously, he survived, but at a terrible cost. His face was horribly disfigured. He lost both of his eyes, his nose, and one of his arms. His lips and ears were badly damaged, and the skin that healed took on an unsettling, waxy appearance. Raymond's family loved him and did their best to care for him, but his appearance terrified people. In the small, close-knit community of Koppel, where he lived, strangers recoiled in fear when they saw him. Children whispered that he was a monster, and even adults couldn't hide their discomfort. To avoid the cruelty of the world, Raymond began walking only at night. Under the cover of darkness, he would set out along State Route 351, or the back roads near the old trolley tracks, using his memory to navigate. And it was during these nocturnal walks that the legend of the Green Man was born. Drivers traveling along the dark country roads would sometimes spot Raymond in the dead of night. Some described his skin as having a sickly green hue, distorted further by the dim light of passing cars. Others swore they saw his body glowing faintly in the dark. In truth, This glow was likely a trick of the light, headlights reflecting off his scarred, waxy skin. But to those unfamiliar with Raymond's story, the sight was terrifying. Word spread quickly. There was a monster wandering the roads of Pennsylvania. The rumors evolved over time, turning Raymond into a boogeyman named Charlie No-Face, or the Green Man. The myth became especially popular among teenagers, who would dare each other to drive along the roads Raymond walked, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Some were scared away by the eerie figure they encountered in the night, but others, intrigued by the strange man, stopped to talk to him. To their surprise, Raymond was kind and gentle. He never begged or asked for help. Instead, he would politely chat with those brave enough to approach him, sharing stories from his life and even accepting small gifts like cigarettes or beers. Despite the frightening tales that surrounded him, Raymond wasn't a monster, just a man who had endured unimaginable hardship and found peace in the solitude of the night. Raymond continued his nightly walks for decades. Locals grew to know him and treated him with kindness, but the legend of Charlie No-Face persisted, taking on a life of its own. As years passed, the line between myth and reality blurred. New generations learned the story of the Green Man without ever knowing the truth behind it, that the monster on the road was just Raymond, a man forced into isolation by the cruelty of others. In 1985, at the age of 74, Raymond Robinson passed away, bringing an end to his lifelong journey through the shadows. His death was mourned by those who knew him, but the legend continued to spread, told and retold as a spooky tale for thrill seekers and curious travelers. Even today, some people in western Pennsylvania still talk about Charlie No-Face. They drive along the same back roads at night, hoping to catch a glimpse of the eerie figure with glowing skin. The truth about Raymond Robinson is no longer widely known, and for many, the story remains just another creepy urban legend, a ghostly figure wandering the highways, cursed to roam the night forever. But those who knew the real Raymond Robinson will tell you, he wasn't a monster. He was a man who had suffered greatly, but found a way to live, even when the world turned away from him. And perhaps in the end, that makes his story even more haunting. Because sometimes, the real horror isn't the monsters we imagine. It's the way we treat those who don't fit the mold of what we think is normal. And somewhere, along the dark roads of Pennsylvania, the spirit of Charlie No-Face still lingers. His legend a reminder of how fear and ignorance can turn even the kindest souls into monsters in the eyes of the world. Thank you all for listening to my stories. If you enjoyed them, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos.